Joseph Force Crater. Joseph Force Crater, January 5, 1889, disappeared August 6, 1930, declared legally dead June 6, 1939, was a New York State Supreme Court justice who went missing amid a political scandal. He was last seen leaving a restaurant on West 45th Street in Manhattan and entered popular culture as one of the most mysterious missing persons cases of the 20th century. Despite massive publicity, the case was never solved and was officially closed 40 years after he disappeared. Crater's disappearance fueled public disquiet about New York City corruption and was a factor in the downfall of the Tammany Hall political machine. Early life and legal career. Joseph Crater was born in Easton, Pennsylvania, the eldest of four children of Frank Ellsworth Crater and the former Layla Virginia Montague. Crater was educated at Lafayette College class of 1910 and Columbia University. He was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. During his time at Columbia, Crater met Stella Wheeler, who was at the time married, and he helped her get a divorce. The pair married shortly thereafter, in spring 1917. Crater's official title was Justice of the New York Supreme Court for New York County, which is a trial court despite the designation Supreme New York State's highest court is the Court of Appeals. He issued two published opinions, Rotkovitz v. Sohn, involving fraudulent conveyances and mortgage foreclosure fraud, and Henderson v. Park Central Motors Service, dealing with a garage company's liability for an expensive car stolen and wrecked by an ex-convict. Disappearance. In the summer of 1930, after the start of the first investigations of what would become the Seabury Commission, Crater and his wife Stella Mans Wheeler were vacationing at their summer cabin in Belgrade, Maine. In late July, Crater received a telephone call. He offered no information to his wife about the content of the call other than to say that he had to return. The next day, he arrived at his 45th Avenue apartment, but instead of dealing with business, he proceeded onward to Atlantic City, New Jersey, with his mistress, showgirl Sally Lou Ritzy, who used the stage name Ritz. Crater returned to Maine on August 1 and traveled back to New York on August 3. Before making this final trip, he promised his wife that he would return by her birthday on August 9. Crater's wife stated that he was in good spirits and behaving normally when he departed for the city. On the morning of Wednesday, August 6, Crater spent 2 hours going through his files in his chambers, reportedly destroying several documents. He then had his law clerk Joseph Mara cash 2 checks for him that amounted to $5,150, equivalent to about $79,784 in 2020 dollars. At noon, he and Mara carried 2 locked briefcases to his apartment, and he let Mara take the rest of the day off. Later that evening, Crater went to a Broadway ticket agency, Supreme Tickets, and bought 1 seat from William Deutsch, the proprietor of Supreme, for a comedy called Dancing Partner at the Belasco Theater. He then went to Billy Haas's Chophouse at 332 West 45th Street, where he ate dinner with Ritzy and William Klain, a lawyer friend. Klain later told investigators that Crater was in a good mood that evening and gave no indication that anything was bothering him. Last known sighting. Crater's dinner companions gave differing accounts of his departure from the restaurant. Klain initially testified that the judge got into a taxicab outside the restaurant about 9:30 p.m. and drove west on 45th Street, and this account was initially confirmed by Ritzy. At the sidewalk, Judge Crater took a taxicab. Klain and Ritzy later changed their story and said that they had entered a taxi outside the restaurant while Crater had walked down the street. Delayed responses to disappearance. There was no immediate reaction to Crater's disappearance. When he did not return to Maine after 10 days, his wife began making calls to their friends in New York, asking if anyone had seen him. Only when Crater failed to appear for the opening of the courts on August 25 did his fellow justices become alarmed. They started a private search but failed to find any trace of him. The police were finally notified on September 3, and after that the missing judge was front-page news. Investigation. Once an official investigation was launched, the case received widespread publicity. Detectives discovered that the judge's safe deposit box had been emptied and the two briefcases that Crater and Mara had taken to his apartment were missing. These promising leads were quickly lost amid the thousands of false reports from people claiming to have seen the missing man. Sally Lou Ritzie, June Bryce, and Vivian Gordon. Crater enjoyed the city's nightlife and had been involved with several women. In the aftermath of the case, two of the women he had been involved with left town abruptly and a third was murdered. Ritzie, the showgirl who had dined with him the evening that he vanished, left New York in August or September 1930. She was found in late September 1930, living in Youngstown, Ohio, with her parents. Ritzie said that she had left New York suddenly because she had received word that her father was ill. Ritzie was still being subjected to interviews by police investigating the Crater case in 1937, by which time she was living in Beverly Hills, California. Showgirl June Bryce had been seen talking to Crater the day before he disappeared. A lawyer acting for Crater's wife believed that Bryce had been at the center of a scheme to blackmail Crater, thus explaining why Crater had taken cash out of the bank and that a gangster boyfriend of Bryce had killed the judge. Bryce disappeared the day that a grand jury was to convene on the case. In 1948, she was discovered in a mental hospital. Vivian Gordon, a third woman, was involved in high-end prostitution and linked to Madame Polly Adler. Gordon had liaisons with a large number of influential business people, and was the owner, on paper at least, of a number of properties believed to be fronts for illegal activity. She was also seen around town with gangster Jack Legs Diamond, with whom Crater was rumored to socialize. Crater had known Diamond's former boss, organized crime figure Arnold Rothstein, and had been extremely upset at Rothstein's murder. On February 20, 1931, Gordon was angry about a conviction that had resulted in her losing custody of her 16-year-old daughter. She met the head of an official inquiry into city government corruption launched in the wake of Crater's disappearance and offered to testify about police graft. She was murdered 5 days later. The publicity surrounding Gordon's killing led to the resignation of a policeman whom she had accused of framing her, and the suicide of her daughter. Tammany Hall's hold on the city was largely eliminated in the ensuing scandal, as it was already weakened by Rothstein and the conflict over his former empire. This also led to the resignation of Mayor Jimmy Walker. Open verdict. In October, a grand jury began examining the Crater case, calling 95 witnesses and amassing 975 pages of testimony. Mrs. Crater refused to appear. The conclusion was that the evidence is insufficient to warrant any expression of opinion as to whether Crater is alive or dead, or as to whether he has absented himself voluntarily, or is the sufferer from disease in the nature of amnesia, or is the victim of crime. At the time, some theorized that Crater had left town with another woman or fled to avoid revelations of corruption, but the case's extensive publicity would have made it virtually impossible for him to begin a new life somewhere else. On January 20, 1931, 6 months after his disappearance, Crater's wife found envelopes containing checks, stocks, bonds, and a note from the judge in a dresser drawer which had been empty when searched earlier by police. The discovery led to new but ultimately inconclusive leads, and no further trace of Crater was ever found. The case was officially closed in 1979. Mrs. Crater. Crater met Stella Mance Wheeler in 1917 when he served as her divorce lawyer, and they married 7 days after her divorce was finalized. Mrs. Crater remained at their vacation home in Maine during the search for her husband, until her discovery of the hidden envelopes. Without Crater's income, Mrs. Crater was unable to maintain the couple's Fifth Avenue apartment and was evicted. She petitioned to have the judge declared officially dead in July 1937. She was reportedly living on the $12 per week, approximately $216 in 2013 funds that she earned as a telephone operator in Maine. Mrs. Crater married Carl Kuntz, a New York electrical contractor, in Elkton, Maryland, on April 23, 1938. Kuntz's first wife had hanged herself only 8 days before the wedding. Crater was finally declared legally dead in 1939 thanks to Mrs. Crater's lawyer, noted New York attorney Emil K. Ellis. She received $20,561 in life insurance, approximately $382,543. Mrs. Crater separated from Kuntz in 1950 and died in 1969 at age 70. Mrs. Crater expressed her belief that her husband had been murdered in her own account of the case, The Empty Robe, which was written with freelance writer and journalist Oscar Fraley and published by Doubleday in 1961. Recent information. On August 19, 2005, authorities revealed that, after her death at age 91, they had received notes that had been written by Queens resident Stella Farrockside Good, in which she claimed that her husband, NYPD Detective Robert Good, had learned that Crater was killed by Charles Burns, an NYPD officer who also worked as a. According to the letter, Crater was buried near West 8th Street in Kenai Island, Brooklyn, at the current site of the New York Aquarium. Police reported that no records had been found to indicate that skeletal remains had been discovered at that site when it was excavated in the 1950s. Richard J. Toffel, the author of Vanishing Point, The Disappearance of Judge Crater and the New York He Left Behind, expressed skepticism of Farrockside Good's account. Popular culture. The phrase "to pull a Judge Crater" or simply "to pull a crater" means to disappear. It is no longer widely used. For many years following Crater's disappearance, Judge Crater, call your office was a standard gag of nightclub comedians. Crater has been referenced in several TV comedies. In the M*****H episode Bless You, Hawkeye, Colonel Potter says the keys to the lab have been pulling a Judge Crater. In the Green Acres episode Not Guilty, Mr. Haney, speaking to his bloodhound, says, "Come on, Clarence, let's see if we can pick up on Judge Crater's trail again." Ebb responds, "Who's Judge?" followed by Oliver's "Never mind." Crater is portrayed on the television series Night Gallery in the season 3 episode Rare Objects, being among several other presumed dead people in a living zoo-like collection. In the Dick Van Dyke Show episode Very Old Shoes, Very Old Rice, the judge performing Rob and Laura Petrie's wedding ceremony is named Judge Crota. Rob misunderstands him to say he was Judge Crater and questions the judge, who makes a joke about the similarities of their names. In the Golden Girls episode Job Hunting, when Rose asks the girls to guess what she finds in the refrigerator, Dorothy answers, "Judge Crater." In the Designing Women episode Getting Married and Eating Dirt, Julia Sugarbaker jokes that Elvis Presley is probably on a houseboat in Brazil with Judge Crater and Lake the Russian Space Dog. In the Archer episode Skytanic, Issy's head Mallory Archer complains about the missing bartender. Guy sees an empty glass and all of a sudden he's Judge Crater. As a publicity stunt for their 1933 film Bureau of Missing Persons, First National Pictures promised in advertisements to pay Crater $10,000, equivalent to $200,000. Crater's last letter, possibly written on the day of his disappearance, was sold at auction on June 22, 1981, for $700. The letter was marked confidential and began, "The following money is due me from the persons named. Get in touch with them, for they will surely pay their debts." It was incorrectly reported that this letter was Crater's will.